Welcome to Code and Cappuccino. In this video, we are going to learn about closures in JavaScript. And let me tell you, if you want to crack a big product-based company, this topic is really important. I'm going to break this down into two videos. In the first video, we will learn about the basic understanding of closures and few very simple examples. In the second video, we are going to learn how we can implement closures in real life projects and what are the use cases of closures. So let's get started. I've opened VS Code. So first we will understand one statement and then we will move to the example of closures. Okay, so function retains access to its lexical environment. You need to understand what is lexical environment first. So for example, I have a function that is parent here, and inside that function I have another function child. Now, what is lexical environment? So see, lexical environment is like where the function is present. For example, let's talk about parent. So where is this parent function present? It's present globally, right? Nothing is above the level. So the lexical environment of parent is global. Now let's talk about lexical environment of child. Now this function is present inside the parent function, right? So the parent function, whatever the variables, whatever will be the functions of that part, that is the lexical environment of child. So I hope you understand this. Like the lexical environment of child is the parent function. Okay, so now let's move to closures. Like, let's see what's happening in this code. I have a function parent and I have defined a variable inside it, and I have a function child, and we are returning child. We are returning child means we are returning a function. I hope you know that in JavaScript we can return a function, right? So it means when we execute parent, when we call parent, we are returning a function. So here I have named it as a closure function. So this is a function, so we are again calling it. Okay, so let's see in the code what's happening. Yeah, so I'll just run it and we are getting 20. So it means this console is printing 20. So again, let's get back to the statement. Function retains access to its lexical environment. It means the child function still remember what is local where. So it still has the access of that. Now, you must be thinking that we are calling the parent function, right? Like, and we are getting inside the parent function, we have child, like we are returning child. So, we are just returning this piece of code. So, you must be thinking that in closure function, we are just returning this much, right? So, how can we access local where? So this is where closure comes into picture. I'm gonna show you inside the DevTools of Chrome. So let us check this. So here you can go in sources and you can go in index.js. In that, if you will just click on here, you can attach a debugger here. So I have attached a debugger here. Let me refresh my screen. So you see it's forming a closure. Like in the scope part, we can actually see closure parent local var 20. Now this is important. Like I know we are still confused and don't get this. So let's get deep into it. So this child function still remembers the variables or functions of its lexical environment. It means when we are returning the child function, it is still carrying the variables with it. For example, you can see that in closure we have variable var 20. But let's say I have one more variable and I am not using it inside child. What do you think? Like, will this still be there inside the closure? Think about it. Let me remove the debugger, refresh my screen, and now I'll put the debugger. It's saved. Let me refresh it. So it is just forming closure with 20. It means like we are not using b inside the child function, so that will not retain it. Like when the closure is forming, it will only retain the local var which we are using inside the child function. I hope you understood this. So B is not actually getting retained. It is with the help of garbage collector. We are just cleaning that up because it's not in use. We are not using it inside the child function. So we don't want it. So it's not there. I hope you understood this part. Now, okay, so we still need to understand what is console.dir. So console.dir, we can use this on functions. It's like really useful for the developers. So you see, it's printed a function and we can actually see what is inside it, like the scopes, the prototypes, everything we can see. So if I open scopes, we'll be able to see closure, like it is forming closure. The child function is forming closure with the parent and it is storing the local var. This is the reason we are able to access it here. Okay, now we also have B, right? What if we use it? I'm consoling B as well. Now, according to our understanding, local var and B both should be retained because now I'm using B in the child function, right? So let's check that out. We have to go in scopes and yeah, that worked. So local var and B both are there. It means now as we are using in the child function, we are able to retain both of them. Isn't it beautiful? Like if we are not using, garbage collector is just collecting it, and if we are using it, then it's retaining it. This is the magic of closures, I guess. We will see how this code works internally. So I have a function here, parent, which is returning child. So child is again a function. It means parent is returning a function. Now we are calling the parent function and kind of storing it into a variable. So in the variable, what is there in the variable? There is a function here as parent was returning child, right? So here when we will call the closure function, we are actually calling the child function. I hope you understood the code. Now let's see how it actually works in the execution context. So whenever any JavaScript code executes, a new execution context is formed. Okay, now while running the code, if we encounter a variable, so we will give it undefined as a memory, and if there is a function, we will just provide the whole function to it. Let's see what I'm actually saying. So on the first line, we saw that there is a function. So the name of the function is parent. So we will just write it parent here. What we have to store inside this? Now we will store the whole function inside it. Like whatever is inside the curly braces, everything will get stored in the parent one here. Now let's come to the 11th line. We are creating a variable closure function. So closure function, whenever we create a variable, we are gonna assign undefined to it. So let me assign undefined. Now parent is getting executed, right, in the line 11th. So whenever a function is executed, like a new execution context is formed. So let me go here Now, after this, we come to here, and this is the execution context of parent. Now, let us see line by line what is inside parent, right? So, inside parent, on the second line, we have a variable, that is local var. As we have a variable, so we will assign undefined to it. Now again we have another variable b. It's a variable, so we will assign undefined to it. Now we have a function here, so that is child. So for function we just assign the whole function code to it. Okay. Now on the line 8th, we are returning child. We are returning a function outside, right? So this function is gonna return out. Now, whenever we return function, do you know how the code looks? So it will look like function. It will look like an anonymous function. Whatever arguments are there will be there here, and the code inside it. So for us, it's console log, local var, and b. Plus, now comes the important part. Whenever a function is returned, a baggage is packed to it. So you can just understand it like a baggage, in which we have all the variable assigned, like a local var 20 and b 80. It's attached to this function. Okay, now let's move to the next line, that is we are back on the global part, right? As the parent has returned it, so we are back to the execution context here. Now it has returned to the closure function, right? So this particular function is attached to the closure function now. Okay, now as it is attached, we will remove this undefined, and again it's a function here. Now on the 12th line, we are calling the closure function. So whenever we call a function, we are gonna create a new execution context. So this is the execution context of closure function. Now let's see what is inside closure function, right? So here we have a function, and it's just consoling the local variable and b. Now where do we get this, like local variable? So this is the local scope of this execution context. There is nothing, right? There is no local variable, there is no b. So it is gonna check its baggage, like what is here? It's 20, right? So it is gonna console 20, and b is also present, it is gonna console 80. So this is how it works. So when you are in an interview, just don't name it as a baggage or something. Just tell that variables are attached to this function in parts of closure. This I just told, so you'd probably remember it well. So I hope you understood this properly. We are gonna see one more example of this. I have one function that is outer. Inside that function we have another function inner, in which we are incrementing the counter variable and returning from that. And from the outer function we are returning the inner function. Okay, so now we have created another variable. We are calling the outer function here. As outer function is returning the inner function, this inner function will get stored in this answer with a baggage. You remember, right? In the baggage there will be all the variables and functions which are used inside the inner function. We will see this deeply when we are learning about execution context. And now we are just calling the answer and printing it. What do you think? What will be the output in this case? So it will be 1 and 2. We can also see on the console. So the output is 1 and 2. So it means it incremented once, then when we are calling it again, it still remembers its lexical environment, right? Because we incremented it to 1, then we are calling it again and then it became 2, so it still remembers its lexical environment. Let us check this whole thing in the execution context again. So let us see the memory allocation phase. We have an outer function, right? So here we will give outer. Outer is a function, so like whole function code will be assigned to this. Then on the 22nd line, we have a variable that is answer. As it's a variable, we will give it the value undefined. Okay. Now answer equals to outer. Whenever a function is getting executed, a new execution context is formed. So let's say this one. Here, let's say this is the execution context of outer. Let's see the outer function properly now. Now we are seeing inside the outer function. Okay, on the line 15. So we have a variable counter first. So counter. So counter, it's a variable, so we will give the value undefined. Now then we have a inner as a function, so it's as a function, so whole function code will be assigned here, and then we are returning the inner function, like, so this is getting returned here again. So it's getting returned whenever a function is returned. Like, how does that code look? So that code is like an anonymous function, and inside that whatever the code, for example here it's counter plus plus and return counter, so that whole thing will get returned. Okay, so we are returning it and like it's getting assigned to undefined, right? So let me just remove undefined, and it has a function which is this one. Okay, now let's move to the line 23. In this we are consoling and kind of again executing the answer, right? Because outer is returning a function, so we have to execute answer. So whenever a function is called, again a new execution context is formed. Let's say this one. So this is the execution context of answer. Now this we have to implement in the execution context. Now when this function is returned, it is returned with the baggage, right? So it has a variable counter 0. So see, counter variable is getting used inside the inner function. This is the region it is carrying it. Let's say that there is another variable a, its value is 90, and we are not using it inside the inner function. So when the inner function is returned, we will not carry it forward, as we are not using it, right? The garbage collector will simply collect it. So now let's try to execute it. So counter plus plus, so it will find the value of counter in its baggage. So it's 0, so counter will become 1, and it is getting returned out of it. And then we are consoling it, right? So it's giving the value 1, like it's returning it, and console.log, it will simply print on console 1. Now this baggage value became 1. We are again calling it. When we are again calling it, a new execution context will get formed. Let's say this is the new execution context. Now again counter plus plus, so 1 will become 2 and it will get returned. So from the new execution context, so 2 is getting returned. So finally then 2 will print in the console after 1. And yeah, this is how the whole function is behaving. I hope you understood this. Like, like on YouTube, closure is not explained with the help of execution context. So please do subscribe to the channel. So that is it for the part one of closures. In the part two, we are gonna discuss the uses of closure, like the real life uses. For example, when we are building real applications, we use memoize function, right? So that is again a big use case of closure. We will try to see, we will dig deeper into the browser, we will dig deeper into the execution context as well. So first is the memoized one. Second is there is something called once function in JavaScript. Once function is like it will just execute once, and if you try to call it again, it won't. Yes, there is something like that in JavaScript, and we will learn about it. We will try to implement how to create that once function. And next is the module pattern in JavaScript. That's like a really famous pattern, and mostly for interviews, it's a really important one. So yeah, in the next video, we are gonna learn about these three things. So make sure to like the video, make sure to subscribe it, and do comment below if you have any questions. Thank you.